Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to sqadia.com. My name is Muhammad Osama, and today we are talking about data collection in medical statistics and research. This specific lecture in the series of data collection is about data collection forms and data quality. In this lecture, we're going to talk about paper forms, e-forms or electronic data capture, piloting, and quality of data. So let's start off with data collection forms. Data collection forms, as the name identifies, whenever we are about to conduct a research. So first of all, we come up with a research question, which is the objective of our study. Afterwards, we choose the specific and suitable study design that suits our research question. And when these things have been decided, then we are about to collect the data, and for that we select different type of outcome measurement tools, different type of questionnaires which are already present, or we make one of our own. But for that we need to design those data collection forms, even if we are using already present forms, we need to make some modifications into it, or how can we actually combine different type of outcome measurement tools. So that is a very important thing, in my opinion, when it comes to research, because data collection is the part on which your results are actually based. You can revisit your results, you can revisit your analysis, you can revisit your data entry, but you cannot revisit your data collection because that has to be done right the first time. So it is important to provide a written or electronic record of the data collected and to facilitate data analysis using a computer, because in the modern days the research is dependent on computer use. Even the data entry and data analysis is also done on different type of software such as SPSS. So when we talk about data collection, we need different type of forms for that. Now, those forms can be, as for example, conventionally, we can use paper forms or paper questionnaires that we usually see. But in the modern day, in the modern research, we also use different type of electronic forms or electronic data capture processes, such as Google Forms or something like that. So before we move on to the electronic forms and paper forms, so there are some general guidelines for all type of forms, regardless of they are paper-based or electronic. So the general idea or general guideline for these forms is that, first of all, every participant or every questionnaire should have an ID number for which we can use it for tracking the form or tracking the individual or tracking that specific questionnaire once it has been entered into the data. We should also include the date on which the data was collected by the participants, and we should also mention that which researcher was responsible for collecting that response or that questionnaire, because sometimes it happens that it's not the questionnaires are not filled by the participants or the patients themselves. Instead, the researcher is actually filling the questionnaire for the patient. For example, if the researcher is collecting data from the patient record, so the researcher is collecting the data. And in big researches, usually a lot of researchers are actually collecting the data. So sometimes you need to find out that if there was a problem in any one questionnaire, who actually filled that form, so you can ask from him or her. So you need to have the information that who was the person who filled out that form. So there should be clear instructions for filling out the form, and there are especially clear instructions for any specific questions. For example, you can give examples either within the form or as a separate document before the participant or the researcher is going out to collect the data, so that he would have or she would have an idea how to fill out that form. In large studies, training in filling out the forms is very important because, as I gave you the example, if a lot of researchers are conducting a study and the researchers are themselves filling out the forms, so you need to train them so that everyone would be collecting the data based on the same criteria, based on the same format, and there wouldn't be any differences between the different researchers who are actually collecting the data in your study. That would actually increase the accuracy, consistency, and reliability of your data. Design the form to minimize data recording error. So you should give an importance to how you are designing the layout of your questionnaire or data form, because that would have very big impact on your data collection process. Let me give an example. For example, if the questions are not clearly defined, then what should be or what type of response should be there for the question, and a person, for example, you ask the height from an individual in that questionnaire, and you did not mention that what should be the unit for it, and someone wrote a value, but you don't know that is it what is the unit for that quantity that he has mentioned. Or for example, if someone has mentioned weight, but you don't know that it is in kg or it is in pounds, so you do not know, and that data is useless for you. So for that, give close-ended questions wherever possible, and also the data types may vary for a particular item. As I already mentioned, ensure it is clear what is recorded. For example, clearly mention then what type of unit you are asking. Now, other guidelines for forms include that always number the questions or items. So you should know, and the individual that who is filling out the form should also know that how many questions he has filled, and so that they would not miss any question. So they would already know that the first question has ended here and the second question has started from here. Number the pages, so you would know if any page is missing, and decide whether to use boxes, lines, or spaces for answers depending on the space available and data to be recorded. Let me give you an example. For example, if there's a close-ended question, it's better to use a box where the person can tick mark it. And if you're using an open-ended question, so just give that person a line or space to write his or her own response. Think about the anticipated data analysis so that data are collected in the appropriate format. Now that is very important. What type of data analysis you are going to do with that data, you should decide that first. You should think about it. And that would actually help you to collect the kind of data that you require for that type of analysis. For example, if you want to find out the mean age of the participants, so you should not divide the age into categories. You should keep it as an open continuous variable so that you can find out the mean age and the standard deviation for that variable. And that is very important to design the questionnaire, to design the form in a way that actually reflects the purpose of your study and how you're going to analyze that data. Have a well-organized filing system so that individual forms can be easily found if needed at a later date, because sometimes there may be a problem in the data entry and you want to revisit something. So you should have a proper filing system and you should not just discard your questionnaires. Now, we have generalized the guidelines for different type of research forms, and now specifically talking about paper forms. So there are also some things that we can actually take care of and ensure better response to our questionnaires from the participants. So first of all, they should be clear and easy to fill out. They should not be cramped, and there should not be a lot of questions here and there, and the patient or the individual who's filling out that form, if he looks at it, it would be very difficult for him to analyze that. So adequate space for inserting numbers and text for the individual who's filling out the form. So it should not be very, text should not be very close or small and stuff like that. And use color other than white for the form to make them more attractive to work with, especially when you're dealing with younger population, or if they lose interest while filling out that form. So that is also very important. It may increase the cost of your paper forms, but it can actually benefit you in the way that you get good and reliable responses from the participants of your study, especially if they are filling out the forms themselves. When more than one form is required, such as for follow-ups, like for example, you are doing a study in which there is a baseline analysis, then there is a short-term analysis and long-term follow-up analysis. So use a different color for each occasion of the form. So it would be easy for you to identify, okay, this one is the baseline, this one is the short-term, this one is the long-term follow-up. And it helps a lot, believe me, when it comes to tracking and filing your data. Long-term forms can be off-putting, so consider how to make them as short as possible, but not to give up or exclude anything or any variable that was important for you to put in to your questionnaire to collect the data about it. Now, we talked about the paper forms. Now, on the other hand, we have electronic data capture or e-forms, and it is increasingly becoming popular among researchers because it gives you an access to great amount of population using social media and email, etc. So when you are dealing with electronic forms, so make sure each original data entry form or data collection session is kept for later checking. And if you're making any modifications to it, so the edited forms should be saved as new files. So you should have the original file whenever you want to revisit it. Each form or page of a form should be uniquely identified with a particular subject so that they can be merged correctly later. For example, if you are using a questionnaire which consists of both neck disability index and oswestry back disability index, so they should be correctly identified as separate outcomes, and so that they can be clearly analyzed later on, and they should be numbered as that as well. So keep careful audit trials with dates and file names, and back up all the data because you need a backup. It's very important. Moreover, keep careful track of the master copy of data from where editing or additional data collection is taking place. And the edited files, as I already mentioned, should be saved as a different file. Use filters to jump to later questions where particular questions are not applicable. For example, if there's a question which says, do you have you experienced neck pain in the last 7 days? And there's an answer yes or no. So if the person answers no, so the next question, for example, that is, if you experience neck pain, what was the severity of it? So if the person said no, then he should not be asked that question. That question should be skipped. So you should code your question in such a way that if the person is not required to answer that question of series, so that should be skipped based on its previous response. So that should be something that should be dealt with when making electronic questionnaires. Built-in checks for impossible or inconsistent values wherever possible to avoid data recording errors. So that people may not enter any data which should not be you should not be able to analyze, and that would actually make you lose that precious data of yours. And consider having the coding programmed in, and how can code and how is the different codes allocated to different categories and variables. We are going to talk about it in the next slides that are coming up. So another very important thing is anonymity and confidentiality. Whenever we talk about ethics and research, the confidentiality of the participants and patients should always be preserved. So that is why any identifiers which can identify who that person was, like their name, etc., it should be eliminated from the data and should be kept in lock and key. So use an ID number rather than a name as the identifier to maintain confidentiality, so no one can recognize who that person was. And actual names and corresponding numbers should be stored separately and securely as well, because sometimes you may need to revisit the original form and original data to get some information. But other than that, it should be kept confidential. If the study is anonymous, it should still include an ID for each time for tracking purposes. So you should give an ID by yourself. So you would know that this is patient number 1, this is patient number 2, this is patient number 3. But anyone who is looking at that data, that person cannot identify who actually the patient number 1 was. So that would serve the purpose of confidentiality as well as the purpose of tracking the data. Sometimes data analysis can throw up a query that may be resolved if the specific original forms can be checked, and that can happen if you have given a separate ID or identification number to every form or questionnaire or participant. So that is very important. Now, piloting. Piloting is based on a pilot study, which is actually a study conducted on a very small sample size, and it is actually a trial study to identify any loopholes or problems or shortcomings in your research, and that actually helps you to make adjustment and corrections before starting the original study. And it is very important to actually revisit or review your data collection tactics, because once the data has been collected in your original research, whatever you are doing, you cannot change that, you cannot revisit it back because you have collected all the data. So it is useful to test the data collection process in a range of circumstances to make sure it will work in practice. So a pilot study is very important, and I always suggest to everyone that always conduct a small pilot study before going on for your original research. Trialing the data collection form on a smaller sample than intended for the study is actually known as piloting when it comes to data collection, and it enables problems with the data collection to be identified and resolved, as I already mentioned, and that actually benefits the researcher a lot, and trust me on that. Ensure the form can accommodate all possible responses, like there's enough space. Sometimes the outcomes are correct, the study design is correct, all the questions that you have included in the questionnaire are correct, but it's the formatting of the questionnaire, it's the visual formatting of the questionnaire that is not correct. So piloting also makes you realize if that is the problem, and you can adjust that. So check if there is enough space where a free text answer will be given, or a text box approach. For example, if all the questions are correct, study design is correct, methodology is correct, everything is fine, but you have given a question but there's not enough space for the person to write a full response which would actually be meaningful. So even though everything was correct, but just based on the visual formatting of the questionnaire, you actually lost some precious data. Now, data quality. Data quality is very important, because if the quality of data is pure, it's very good, then it's a very good research. The results would be good, the analysis would be spot on. But if the data quality is very poor, then obviously the results would not be reliable, they would not be valid, you'd have a lot of missing values and a lot of problems. So always focus on the data collection, because I personally perceive that this is the most important part of the research. It is also the most difficult, but it is also the most meaningful, because the research is nothing without the data. You cannot do the analysis without the data, you cannot do the results without the data, you cannot write the manuscript without the data. So that is very important. So it is critical that data quality is monitored and happens as the study progress, and the one thing to ensure that is do a good piloting procedure. Too late if problems are only discovered at the analysis stage, because you cannot revisit it and you cannot do that. And once again, do piloting to prevent this mishap. If checks are made during the data collection, then problems can be corrected along with the study process when it's going on. And more frequent checks may be worthwhile at the beginning of the data collection, because the data isn't that much that has been collected, and you can make changes at that time as well. And there's also a greater chance of poor data collection in the beginning of the study, because the processes are new, the staff is less experienced, and you are not experienced with the process, that how it's going to turn out. So it's better to make frequent checks in the early part of the research process. Now, suggestions to ensure data quality. What are the actual steps that you can take to ensure good data? So first of all, check the completion rates for forms. So ask the questions like, are all the pages filled out? And if they are not filled out, what is actually the problem? What is the part where it is going wrong? Is it actually the visual formatting, or am I using the wrong tool, or is my questionnaire very long, or is it not interesting enough? So what is the reason? Are all the question sections completed? If not, why not? Am I being, am I asking too many confidential questions or something like that? And do gaps reflect truly unknown data, or have some data being missed out accidentally? Is the writing clear? Am I conveying the right message, that what am I going to ask, or what am I trying to ask from the participant? So check these things. Now, the second thing is check for accuracy. For example, especially when there are more than one researchers who are actually collecting the data from the participants, and then double check a subsample to determine the quality, how they are doing it, and consider double checking any critical data, and if the data is actually filled in the way you wanted it to be filled, so check for accuracy. And once you have done these two things, then you can take the necessary actions, so such as issuing new instructions to your research fellows who are collecting the data, retrain people who are collecting the data, alter the forms if there is a problem in the form or the questionnaire, or there is a visual formatting is not good enough and that is causing the handicap, or recheck after the changes have been implemented. That is also very important. So once you have taken the actions, when you have made the changes, then revisit and check for completion rates and check for the accuracy once again, and also document the quality control process, and so that that would actually benefit you, that what are the things that actually made my research data collection procedures more accurate and more effective. So that was all about the first part, which was about data collection forms, and I hope you learned something new out of it. Keep on watching sqadia.com for more lectures like this. Thank you.